Welcome, everybody, to the Evolution Podcast, uh, where we bring everyday superheroes, many of them on school, since we are a school based podcast, SKOOL. We talk a lot of school strategy. We bring community owners on, but we always also just like to shine the light on everyday people who help others show up in their communities. Many of them again here on school. So today I get to bring an awesome friend that I've known for a while now in different communities that we've connected on many different things. But one thing that we've super connected on is we're both diehard wrestling fans. So today the Evolution podcast gets extreme. We are going to talk pro wrestling with my buddy Chris Martins.
Hey, thank you for that, Brandon. Yeah, I am definitely a fan of the product. You know, whether it's the indie scene wrestling or professional wrestling, as kind of a lot of the mainstream folks know, as like WWE, AEW, TNA. I think it's just a great example of marketing, of storytelling, of merchandising, of physicality. There's just all these different elements that come together to kind of tell a story, right? And get people caring about somebody's journey, right? So yeah, I'm excited to see where this conversation goes. I'm excited to see how you weave wrestling into stuff. I got my MBA a while back, and I would always bring up wrestling in my assignments, and it was online, so I couldn't tell how it was received. But at the end of the day, it's a powerful business model, right? So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see where the conversation goes.
It's kind of cool. I'm like looking up. I got like a light bulb here while you were talking about that. It's crazy how the business model, if you will, of school and WWE are super similar, right? They're connection platforms. And WWE isn't just fake sports. People who don't understand it'll be like, oh, that's fake. Well, no, it's scripted and it's a story. And then there's a lot of depths, like you said, to the business model. And I think it relates to how school is because school really brings hobbies and passions into one place where people get really passionate about that thing that they share inside jokes. They share things together. They share the way they talk about that thing could be specific to that community, right? And then you don't really have to sell anything. People want more of that experience. And I think WWE is the same with how they base their model. It's all about connection, it's all about that live experience. You can watch the show and get into it. I'm not saying that. But once you go to a live experience, there's nothing else like it. I don't know if you've been live, right?
I've never been live because
Oh,
usually I'm one that undiagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I have ADHD, right? Like I can't really, it's hard to sit down. It's hard to get through something. It's very almost impossible to make it through 3 hours of wrestling programming, which is kind of like your average WWE product. Um, but when I think about, okay, well, I'm going to be there, and you're in the room, you feel the energy, but you're not really, you're focused on other things because of everything that's happening. And when you can watch on TV or when you can watch, on YouTube, I haven't turned on like my TV in years, but if I'm like streaming it on my phone, you just want to get those stories, right? Is this something I care about? Is this something that captures my attention? But I won't discount the live. My sister's gone live. I think everyone who's gone live has had the experience. To your point, you can go from free looking at stuff on YouTube to do you have 15 grand to get your WrestleMania tickets? I mean, there's a big variation of how you can experience this product, right?
I hope WWE kind of follows suit. So I haven't followed this hugely, but there are a lot of artists and stuff pulling for cheaper or for more regulations on like ticket sales and stuff in the music industry
Mhm.
because there's third party things that buy up all the tickets and then sell them for crazy amounts of money. And that happens in the wrestling world like wild. It used to be where if they came to Green Bay, Wisconsin here, you could go and sit in the stands for 30, $20, right? Now you're looking at like $120 to go to a show like that for the same ticket price because all of these third parties are buying them up. I do see that they're trying to make changes in this realm and let the artists and the people pick ticket prices that like stay there and like that's the ticket price and nobody else can buy them up and sell them for more and stuff. I don't know if they could do that in the wrestling business, but I do know to your point that ticket pricing and stuff has priced out that everyday family from experiencing, which I'm doing. I have ADHD too. I don't have time, especially in my life right now. I don't have time really to watch, but I like keeping up with the stories. I'm kind of an internet wrestling fan where I follow certain pages for news and stuff like that, so I know what's going on. And I like the bigger events, like the PLEs they call them now, right?
Yeah.
So I can watch sometimes, but not all the time to keep up to date with everything going on. So I'm more of like I like the reading and the wrestling historian and stuff and like the documentaries and like the
Mhm.
behind the scenes business stuff almost more. But that live experience, that really changed it for me. I can't wait to bring my kids someday because it has nothing to do with it's fake, it's scripted. Like when you're there, the whole thing is theater. The whole thing is an experience. Everybody from the second you walk in the door, if you're 2 hours early, the whole crowd walks around going, woo! Like, and then the whole building will do that. And then if one person does it, the whole building does it. And every chant that happens in the building and everything that happens, the crowd is such a part of the experience that it really makes it next level for me from
Yeah, no, and I think there's something about just seeing the performers live, kind of, following the story arc. And one of the things that has become very interesting, especially in this age of social media, is you'll see like a big star, right? Like you'll see like an Ethan Page, right? And if people aren't familiar with him, I believe he's Canadian. I believe he's, on the NXT brand currently. And he'll run wrestling promotions in Canada for like 20 bucks a pop, right? And he's getting these performers, right? So we're in an interesting space where, you kind of own your character, which is very interesting with WWE because, if folks, are new to wrestling, let's use Royce Keys as an example. So if anyone is not familiar with Royce Keys, he just came over to WWE. If you're a fan of AEW, he would be known as Powerhouse Hobbs, right?
oh, okay.
And I'm sure Powerhouse Hobbs has been around. I'm sure he just didn't pop up in AEW either. Like there's probably more history there, but I know him from AEW, right? But when you come over, it's this whole you're a character, right? And you're part of this production, right? It's kind of like, Disney on Ice. You can't be out there and be like, "Hey, my name is Elsa." They're like, "No, no, no, we got an Elsa.
Yeah.
This is who you are now, and we're gonna build a story around you, or we won't," right? And that's what's become very interesting is that you've got people like Karrion Kross, right? Very over, and his real name is Kevin, and couldn't re-sign a contract, right? Who knows? There's a whole business side to it. But you had mentioned the behind the scenes. So now you get this peek at what's the business really like. And there's a saying, right? You mentioned PLEs, and for people that are new to the space, that's a premium live event, formerly known as a pay-per-view, right? But there's another saying in the industry called kayfabe. So
Yeah.
kayfabe is, Brandon and I are wrestling, you know what I mean? He's the baby face, I'm the heel. We don't like each other. We're fighting, we're fighting, we're fighting. You might see us driving to the next venue together, right? Because you know, in the story is one thing, real life is something else, right? And we're in this interesting space where I think people are sophisticated enough to enjoy the storyline, enjoy the product, but realize that these are performers, these are
Yeah.
folks, these are athletes, these are folks that are telling you a story. And, while it might blur the lines sometimes, basically, home life is different than work life, and I think wrestling is a great example of, you see folks and you think you know them, right? Like you're like, oh, this guy's a jerk, he's this, he's that, and he might be the nicest guy in the world, but as a big 6'5" guy, if you go up and you're like, you're a jerk, you might get punched in the face, right? Like it just
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's like you got to use some common sense and it's buyer beware. But I think we're in a really interesting time of just all this stuff, right? You can get into the behind the scenes, you can get into the story, you can just enjoy the product for what it is, but it can go so much deeper, which is why I've continued to be a fan.
Yeah. Me too. I'm really a fan of the heart behind the business, and I think one of the biggest things that sells still to this day, less because of kayfabe being gone, but still to this day, one of the things that sells is blurring the lines of, "Is this real or is this reality or is this storyline?" I think in the '80s, they really still tried to like The Undertaker for the longest time, wouldn't talk to the good guys, Mark Calloway, he wouldn't talk to the good guys, he was always, like, going to the airport in character, like, he really stuck to kayfabe, like, wrestling is real, you know? Like, the good guys hate the bad guys and the stuff like that. But then as the internet came out, as documentaries came out, as things we started to realize that, like, no, these are all real people, they're playing characters, like you said, and kayfabe kind of now we're in like this reality era where everybody knows everything. They all have Instagrams. You know, if they own a pig as a pet, like you kind of, it's on Instagram, right? There's shout out to Alexa Bliss who did own a pig as a pet. um, so the, it's now where we look at them like, how are they performing? How do they speak on the microphone? How do they make me feel? When there's a big moment, it's like for me, one of my favorite things is wrestling has moments that make you feel things, and they make you like a movie does, or a song does, or a play does. Like wrestling has moments. Like I'll forever remember when Shawn Michaels was in the corner at WrestleMania, and he looked at Ric Flair like with
Mhm.
like tears in his eyes, and like there's so much emotion, and he says, "I'm sorry, I love you," and you can like feel that he feels that. It's really like an acting part. So in this reality era, we really dissect the wrestlers more because we want them to be these perfect little good on the mic, good in the ring, good here, good there, and the internet wrestling communities fickle thing, and we'll pick on these performers a lot. So I think now as wrestling fans, maybe you can chime in on this. Now as wrestling fans, it's a lot more. We're everything's under a microscope. Like if you botch a move, or if you
Oh yeah.
don't say the right thing, or if you everything is under a microscope for these performers.
Yeah, no, it's and I'll make one quick point about the Undertaker before I lean into that a little more. I mean, when the Undertaker's streak broke, there was real emotion in that crowd, right? There's memes of people just like, you know what
Like
I
the
mean? And
one
it's
night, the one,
you were just like the Undertaker has to, the streak can't end, right? So, but that was the power of the story, right? The
yep,
story was it's time to break the streak, right? And it's not, that you didn't know until you watched that this was going to be happening, right? But you got bought into that moment, right? And
yeah,
with botches, these are large, sweaty people, right? These are like when people look at it, the level of physicality and timing and all these things that have to be right while you're in front of, I don't care if it's 20 people, I don't care if it's 200 people, I don't care if it's 20,000 people. They're nerves, there are things that happen, and human bodies, you know what I mean? Like, you've done a move 100 times and all of a sudden you're on the top rope and your knee tweaks, you know what I mean? And even if you don't get hurt, you botch the move, but you want to be safe. And I think that's the point where, there's just the challenge with technology is that, you can't control how it's used, right? So the same technology that will allow you to watch these videos and, stream all this stuff for free is the same technology where people can go in and be like, why are you alive? This is a waste of this. Somebody that can't do what you are doing has the full, audience out there of, being able to be super critical, right? Without having to prove their credentials or anything like that. So I think, you want to be as a fan, I think I'm respectful of the business. I'm respectful that a lot of these performers, again, it's kind of like, whether you're an actor, a wrestler, whatever, there's a script, there's an outcome, there's, you're taking things through. And especially in wrestling, it is so timed. Like these
oh,
guys are, trying to get, seconds, what I mean, shaved down because now there's this, like you've got, even in 3 hours, right? The amount of stuff that you've got to manage is crazy. And you're doing this day after day after day. So, I don't know if I answered the question kind of that you'd originally put out there, but just in general, I think, I I have a deep level of respect and admiration for the product, for the people that perform, and just knowing that, life happens, right? Like there's going to be good things and bad things, because this is, it's scripted, but it's live, and there's a lot of variation that can happen.
Yeah, and every time I listen to it, I keep getting these little like light bulb moments on like how wrestling can really relate to school and like owning a community. And I think like the internet and the watchers and the people that are a part of the community of the universe, they call it in WWE, right? Like
Mhm.
the community of wrestling. It's really WWE sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, right? They listen to their community and the community will say, "Hey, this is what we want." And on school, it's the same thing. When you're trying to connect and you're trying to grow a culture, whatever your niche is, you have to connect with your audience. And sometimes you can like not listen to your audience and you're doing the wrong thing. And that's when you get crickets on
Mhm.
certain posts or certain offers or certain things because you're not listening to what the people want. And I think the wrestling, I take a lot from that, because being a wrestling junkie, as far as history goes, there's a lot of situations where they do listen to what the community wants, and it goes really, really well and shows you exactly that listening to your audience and what they want can go huge. Kofi Kingston, Daniel Bryan,
Mhm.
are two, Big E are some winning the championships when the crowd really wanted that to happen. Those are examples. Then there's other examples where they don't follow through on
Yeah.
that, like LA Knight.
Yeah. I would agree.
Yeah. So, I think there can be a lot of as a community owner and wrestling fan, there's a lot of correlations that I can look and
Right.
be like, "Oh, yeah." I mean, from storylines to getting your audience engaged to, all the everything that you gotta do can relate to how the wrestling storylines go.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great parallel because, you're in several communities, right? And, I believe you own, a few of them, right?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about school is, we spend time in multiple communities, right? So you may own a community, but you're spending time on the platform. So the platform itself is kind of like akin to the WWE universe. But now when the show's in your hometown, Boston or Wisconsin, that's when, you might say, hey, this is my time to shine, right?
Yeah.
So the challenge with a platform like School is that, you can have a banger post, and if no one's in your community, at the time you did the post, now, you lose some of the momentum, right? And maybe somebody will see it, maybe they won't. I think School represents like, you have these moments in time. And what I talk about in a lot of my School posts that I truly appreciate is the energy. So I'll go into a community, and if there's energy there, I'll post there, right? I might not have that same energy in my community, right? But I'm like, hey, I might learn something that I take to my other community. But one of the parallels that I see is kind of like you always have to be marketing, right? I think let's equate this to Ric Flair. Ric Flair, and I won't do a Ric Flair imitation. Just I respect him too much as a as a talent. But basically, he had a quote that I'm paraphrasing that said, "In order to be the man, you have to beat the man."
Yeah.
Right? So the way I equate that to marketing or school is, best known beats the best. So you might have the best community, but if there's a bigger, better known community, they might be getting, the ranking, the push, the hey, organic suggestions, things of that nature, right? So it's really about how do you market, right? Because I think you're either growing your community or you're not, right? I think, and Jack might have said this in a podcast, right? I think, it's hard to maintain. It's hard to maintain a community because you're either shrinking or you're growing. It feels like maintenance doesn't really exist, right?
Yeah.
And the challenge is, and I go through this with my community because I'm like, hey, I'm pretty much the sole poster in my community.
Yeah.
I'm a recruiter and I have access to jobs. So I'm posting the jobs I have. So that feels very organic to me.
Yeah.
What I'm now trying to do is figure out, well, hey, is this important to my audience? Do I have the wrong audience? How do I serve this audience better? Right. And that's the same thing with, in the wrestling world, you would call that getting over. So let's use LA Knight. LA Knight, I think Eli Drake back from his NWA days, right? Great performer, very, very, very over. He's got his little, yeah, his little catchphrases, all
Yeah.
this stuff, right? Sure, he's selling a ton of merchandise. There's probably something happening behind the scenes, whether it's personal life, whether it's, there's probably something why they think, hey, you can't carry the weight of this championship, which basically means you're showing up all the time, right? you're the face of the brand that we can build around, right?
Yeah.
And it's not to say that he can't be, but just right now he's not. And as a fan, what you don't know is you don't know why. It's is he saying he doesn't want it? Is the company making a mistake and not pushing him? Or is it just the pecking order when they're looking at, hey, AJ Styles just retired, Roman Reigns has got, this much time left. I'm wearing my John Cena shirt. I don't know if you can see it, but you know,
Mhm.
John Cena retired. So you might look at your roster of talent and say, hey, you're ready now, but the product isn't ready to push you just yet because of, we've got all these other people in front of you that, we don't see you skipping the line
What is
helping the
it?
product or helping yourself, right? One thing that was very interesting, and I'll end on this to get your thoughts, is there's a Canadian TV host named Bobby Del Rio, big on Clubhouse, and I don't think he's on this platform, but he actually went to high school with TNA Knockout star Gail Kim, and
Oh,
Gail Kim talked about winning the title like as her first. She won the Divas belt, I guess it was called back then, her first match in WWE, and she was like, "Look, I'm 22. I wasn't ready for it." But they pushed her at that time, and then she just wasn't ready to, take advantage of the opportunity because you're 22, you have no home, you're on the road all the time, you're traveling with a bunch of other athletes, right? It's basically like, it's a party bus atmosphere. And some people, they'll respond to that differently, right? They'll
yeah.
respond to that pressure differently. So I think, there's just, there's just so much there. I get off the soapbox. I want to hear your thoughts as well.
Well, I actually wanted to just kinda like I was gonna wrestling nerd here for a second and go off of, like, not no strategy questions or anything. I don't think I love that they're having, Walter or Gunther,
Mhm.
they're pushing him to the moon for all of these legends that he's retiring, and LA Knight is, like, the guy that people really wanna see win the title, and then you got CM Punk and Drew McIntyre, and, like, it feels muddy, but I also don't watch weekly, um, but it feels muddy the way all these retirements are happening, and that the fact that Gunther's, getting the rocket ship put on him, when I don't think, in my opinion, and I could be
Mhm.
wrong, I don't think he's, like, super over.
Well, I think they're trying to establish his
Yeah,
villain arc, right? His
yeah.
heel arc, right? And I think and again, they might just be looking at rosters and they're like, well, who, because some people can go back and forth and some people can't, right? John Cena became like a heel at the very end of his career just to say he did it, right? But he's very comfortable being a good guy. And I think the fans liked him as a good guy, right? You
I
got
think
like,
it was a disaster. The
say again?
whole the whole run as a heel was kind of a disaster.
And was that, all his doing? Was it the writing? Was it, you had elements with Dwayne Johnson, right? Like, how do you say no to one of the most noticeable figures, on the planet, let alone in the wrestling space, right? So that's what I'm saying. The business is all about what's the opportunity. I mean, if you're following stories now, I think, the Elimination Chamber cards are probably being changed because I think Braun Breaker suffered a hernia.
I heard that, yeah.
So maybe Logan Paul takes his spot. Logan Paul's not super over, you know, um, in the wrestling community, but a very, very big influencer, very gifted athlete, right? It's just a question of, sometimes you have the whole right mix of stuff, but it's just not, it's like what happens. And does, LA Knight go to a different company and do better? Maybe. Does he ride it out? It becomes fascinating. But at the end of the day, this guy's getting paid. He's got the exposure that he's getting. And, who knows? Between social media and something else, maybe there's an opportunity for him to say why this is happening or if he knows. Like, look at Ricky Starks. I mean, before coming over to NXT, he basically evaporated from AEW because they weren't going to push him anymore because they were like, look, we're going to, you know, you're friends with Cody Rhodes. We know you're going to NXT. Wish you all the best, but we're not going to continue to build your brand
Yeah,
just so you can leave. Now, was that to their detriment? Maybe.
yeah.
I think I think when he stopped being on the programming, it was noticeable, and I think it left a mark, or a void, but there's just a lot that's out there, and that's what gets me excited as a fan, right? Like I don't know how far we'll get into this, and again, if there's other episodes that we'll do. But, right now, is Jericho the biggest free agent in, wrestling? Maybe, maybe not, right? Um, and they're like, well, where is he? Why wasn't he at the Royal Rumble? I'm like, under AEW contract, you know, has a band named Fozzy. Check the Fozzy website. You know what I mean? He's not going to be in an AEW ring if he's in a stadium performing as Fozzy, right?
Yeah.
And then three, I think he knows the business, right? He knows that basically, he's been very good at reinventing himself, right?
One of the best, in my
Right.
opinion.
So he's got to figure out, hey, man, if I give people what they want and I'm around all the time, right? Like he wasn't before. I think he stopped being on AEW TV maybe like April of 2025. Like he was getting booed. People were telling him to retire. People were, doing all this stuff. And, even though he's a character, they're yelling at him, right? And he is his own character, right? Like he is Chris Jericho. There's not, like he's not playing another person, right? So it becomes very interesting. And hey, how do you take this energy? Because it's energy, whether it's positive or negative, but how do you take this energy and spin it into something else, right? So again, you could do a whole episode on Chris Jericho between his podcasts and what he's meant to the business, and you made the list, right? Like he's like, if you think of all these like Y2J, like
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
think of all these things that this one performer has done, and he's got another run somewhere, right? Is it back at AEW? Is it New Japan? Like does he reunite with? I'm sure him and AJ Styles had clashes and different kind of brands and promotions. So it's just so interesting. But I think he's one that does really well and understanding the business. And I think his absence is, I think he's doing a TV show as well, right? So I think there's reasons for the absence, but it's also you've got to play into that, right? You make it
Well,
part
and
of the
he's
story. You own that, right?
55. Is he in his mid-50s too?
Yeah. No, I want to say, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's gonna take it. He can only perform so much,
Yeah.
especially the way Chris Jericho performs. I mean, I know he's changed his in-ring style
Mhm.
over the last 20 years, but, from when he was like Lionheart, he's not doing as many high rope, high risk maneuvers and stuff as he used to back in the day, but he still has a pretty aggressive style. So that's gonna take its toll. I see him go to WWE. I see him making one final run. I think a lot of those guys wanna make one final run with this Triple H era, and, like, those guys from the last guys from the Vince era kinda wanna come back. They left and make at least one more run. I see Edge even making a
Sure.
quick little maybe a quick little run again, just to kind of, and who knows, maybe there's more behind it behind the scenes, but I feel like they wanna make that one non-Vince run, Like,
Yeah.
I especially Chris Jericho, because he kinda left when Vince was kinda like, I know why he left that the last time to go to AEW, or now he didn't even go to AEW, but to go to New Japan and stuff, was because, they put him and Kevin Owens on, like, in a really bad spot in WrestleMania, and he felt like him and Kevin Owens deserved, and I do too, personally, in my opinion, felt like him and Kevin Owens deserved a bigger spot on WrestleMania. And they kinda were like, "No, you guys are this is where you're at." And Chris was like, "Well, if I'm always gonna be here on the card now, in Vince's eyes, I'm out." And that's why he didn't renew his contract. Um, so I don't know where I was going with that,
No,
actually.
like I said, it's just fascinating the pieces of the business, right? And I think it takes a lot because when you get to that level, there's still people that you've got to get sign off on, right? And for those that don't know Vince McMahon, you know, um, the brains behind the WWE grew it from territories to this international, like literally, wrestling, whether you're a fan or not, people understand what wrestling is, right? Whether you believe it's real, whether you think it's scripted, like, you you understand the brand. And that's what he did. Vince built the power of the brand. I'm not a nice guy, right? And a lot of billionaires aren't nice people, but has also done some things that, are questionable legally and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, very powerful person inside of Stamford, Connecticut, where WWE is based, right? And for you as a performer to basically say, hey, Vince, you got this wrong. There's more that I can do is a big risk, right? especially pre AEW, because, you know, now you're traveling internationally or you're doing very small local shows. And, you got a mortgage, you got all this stuff, you got to figure out how to pay the bills. And, if you're taking that big of a pay cut, that's one thing. And, wrestlers can only wrestle for so long. It's a tremendous toll on your body. It's a tremendous toll on the lifestyle, especially if people are imbibing with, whatever they're taking, whether it's painkillers or more recreational things or drinks or whatever. It's a tough lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
think
when
it's
you
getting better in that regards. A
yeah,
lot of people they're athletes nowadays. Like they take really good care of themselves. Back in the day, they were athletes, but they were more like rock stars. Like,
mhm,
they partied like rock stars, right? I feel like nowadays, and don't I'm sure the road gets to be the road still as much as it used to be, but I think they're more finely tuned athletes and they take their craft seriously and they take their body seriously. I mean, these are people that are traveling a lot, so they're working out in hotels.
mhm,
They're trying to eat good at different like in their rooms and stuff like that. So I mean, and not that they weren't always athletes, but they were also again they were rock stars. There were few that really like took their bodies and craft seriously. Triple H was one of them. Triple H never drank. He never did any of that. He would get up at 4 in the morning and train, and while those other guys were probably just, like, getting back from the club, like,
yeah,
he was always sober and took his craft super seriously, and that's why he was one of the best in the world, right?
yeah,
Um,
and that's why he's running the brand, right? Granted, there's relationship stuff mixed in there, but at the end of the day, there's just like everything else, right? N- Whether you're a wrestler or an actor, and like not every actor goes on to be a director, right? You can look at like a Mark Wahlberg, right? Doing like movies and now he's getting into streaming and maybe he directs or whatever, but he probably has a say in what he does. And I think
yeah,
as wrestlers, some wrestlers have this opportunity to be bigger than their character, like a Dwayne Johnson, right? He's bigger than the character The Rock, right? And he's part of TKO ownership that owns UFC and WWE, right? Now that isn't the path for every performer, but I think if you've got the business mind, you know what I mean, like your John Cena's, like folks that, let's put like let's put Maxwell MJF, Maxwell Jacob Friedman, real name
yeah,
Maxwell
yeah,
Tyler Friedman, right?
yeah, yeah,
When he drops the belt, it's because he's out doing movies. Same thing with Edge. Adam Copeland is off AEW because I think he's on some Disney project, right? So I think there's a lot of intersection of how people in this space understand their brand.
yeah,
So the opportunity is to build a brand. So going back to LA Knight, right? Let's make it a full circle moment. And I don't know LA Knight's real name. I probably have to do some research. I mean, but I like him as a performer. But this gentleman, right? Even if he doesn't get to where he needs to be within the WWE, he's proven that he's over with fans and he can take that brand and do whether it's within the WWE or somewhere else. I think as long as you know what your value is and you know how to grow your brand, you're going to have that ability. And to tie that into school, as school community owners, I think that's our challenge, right? Like I've got a community. I wouldn't even say I'm an indie wrestler yet, right? You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to break into a wrestling school is kind of like where my school journey is, right? I'm knocking on doors and, I'm hoping someone opens up the door to the dungeon and they're like, come train. And, if you
Yeah, yeah,
pass
yeah.
this on, we'll turn on the lights and see what happens, right? So there's so much out there, right? But, I'm not going to compare myself to somebody making, 6 digits of MRR, monthly recurring revenue, right? Like we're on different journeys, right? But the platform that allows that person to make that MRR should allow me to grow as well, right? Now the question is how much do you grow? So that's one of the parallels there. I think the platform, whether it's wrestling or whether it's school, is the opportunity. The question is, okay, how do you get over, right? And do I get over with the platform? Who knows, right? You know what I mean? But I'm here every day trying to figure out, how do I get a little better? And if I get a little better, what does that mean? Am I growing my audience? What I do? And that's the same thing you're doing in the wrestling space is that, as a performer, when you walk away, you've got to change your name most likely because of, trademarks and branding. But, people will get to know you And now the question is, hey, how does that translate into your next step, right?
Yeah, I think that's super important for us to realize too is like your reach, like you're doing things with other communities, you have a podcast, you have a social media reach, like whatever it may be, like your brand is consistency and how you show up for your community and how you what your community's ethos are and programs or like results, right? Like what are your deliverables of your community? Because there's thousands of communities.
Mhm.
So like it's getting more important like wrestling, right? Like I said earlier, like full again, another full circle moment. Like you can't just be a really good talker with zero wrestling skills right now. In wrestling, you can't. Because right now, the era that we are in the 80s, you could get away with that. Hulk Hogan, I'm looking at you. Um,
Yeah,
in the 80s, you could get away with that, but now you can't. So you can't just have the look. You can't just be good on the microphone because the wrestlers are so good athletic, like so many, and you got to keep up. And if you have a good look and a good character, but you don't have the really good in ring acumen, you're going to hurt people. And how I can bring
yeah,
this back to what we were talking about is like the same thing goes with if you're just a high ticket program offer and that's all you're trying to cultivate in your community, you might sell some of that. But then is your community owners getting results? Are they implementing things? Is there something in your process where the people buying those offers are what's the fruit of that? And I think the same thing with wrestling is like you said, like if your brand, if you can't wrestle, but you're really over with the fans, eventually that's going to crack because they're going to see like, wait a minute, we love this guy, but look at what he just did off of the top rope. That was horrendous. And then your stock falls with the crowd. And I think the same thing can be in our communities. If we don't stay consistent, if we don't have clear, valuable deliverables of that community, that's when you're going to get churn, lose members. People just aren't going to, maybe they'll stay, but they're just not going to come back because they don't expect anything different. They don't expect to get anything. And it's the same thing when you're a wrestling character in this business is the fans have to get something. We have to see good in-ring work. We want storylines that make us like off the seat of our pants for a second, like this like reality. We check out from reality when most wrestling fans, right? You dispel realness to experience the storyline. And I think if you don't intertwine all that together, you really get turned on by that community that's supposed to be your audience.
yeah. No, it's definitely a balancing act. And again, when it'll be interesting to see, what the audience is for this podcast, right? Because we didn't get into a lot of, hardcore wrestling stories, right? We
No,
didn't break down anything,
no,
but like literally you could spend hours breaking down
yeah,
matches, right? There's literally wrestling on, 5 days a week, right? And
yeah.
then sometimes weekends with, premium live events and just other overflow things. But at the end of the day, to put it back to what you were saying, it's kind of like, I don't know how many school communities you're in. I'm probably in like 30. And out of that 30, half probably, or, semi dormant, right? And, there's different reasons for it, right? And usually the reason I won't leave is, hey, maybe something will come back, right? Like it takes more energy to like leave than to come back, but that's not where my energy is, right? You search
Yeah.
for where the energy is and you're like, hey, this is where I'm going to spend time because, it's not an echo chamber. Like I said, I own a community. I'm like, the sole poster most times. So I know what I'm going to say,
Yeah.
right? I know what I'm posting because I'm actually working on those jobs, but I'm like, hey, I've got to pivot to figure out, hey, maybe I need to find a different audience. Maybe this audience needs something different from me. You try to figure that out, right? And it's the same thing with being a wrestler and a performer. You might get a horrible gig. I mean, that's a whole podcast episode where you could talk about really talented wrestlers and just the horrible gimmicks they were given. And you're under contract. You're gonna do that gimmick because that's how you get paid, right? And you're like, does this get me over? Does this help? Like, what happens? But at the end of the day, they'll eventually find something that fits, right? Like Stone Cold Steve Austin was not always Stone Cold Steve Austin. He wasn't bad characters, except if you want to
The
the
ringmaster was a
ringmaster.
bad character.
Right? But most people don't remember the ringmaster, right? They might remember stunning Steve Austin, which was, a good version, but he was then able to, get a character that just clicked because he had a story arc with Vince McMahon, you know what I mean? So he was a jerk, but Vince McMahon was a bigger jerk.
Yep.
So, you know, you rooted for the everyday jerk versus the billionaire jerk, right? So it just a lot of things came together. And Vince McMahon has written some horrible, disgusting storylines, right? That are just, you know, didn't age well. You almost can't even play them in their entirety. Um,
Oh,
you know, modern day, right? Um, but
like,
he had you know, he had some good storylines as well, right? So I think, you know, for folks, if we're gonna, you know, like, you know, like attach it to school, if you're in a community and you got to figure out a pivot, then you pivot, right? Because, you know, where do you want to be so you enjoy being there every day? That's how I look at my community. I'm
yeah,
like, hey man,
yeah,
what can I do to make this a place where I want to be? And like I said, it's kind of like being at like a bar and, you know, there's, you know, there you could do a pub crawl and you're in a bar and you like the bar and you like the bartender and you have a beer there, but no one else is in the bar. And you know there's a band playing across the street. You might be like, I need some of that energy. You know,
yeah,
I'm
like,
gonna go
yeah,
check out
yeah,
that bar. I'm gonna go listen to the band, but then I'm gonna come back here because I want the chicken wings. I want to talk to the bartender. I want this
yeah,
stuff. So I think as community owners, you know, I think that's what I would offer up from you know, from being a power user on the platform is that, hey man, you know, not everything's a home run, not everything's instant gratification, but if you consistently can build something that at least you understand, right? You can then figure out how to pivot if it's not landing. And some of it's timing, there's all these different things, right? And like I said, I think wrestling is a great example because we can all think of wrestlers that, you know, a lot of people that don't follow wrestling like day to day might not, you know, you just might know Dwayne Johnson as The Rock. You might not know Flex Maivia, right? Like you may not know that, you know, he wasn't always The Rock, and even when he was The Rock, he was getting booed, right? He wasn't always over as that character. So you got to figure out, like, even when you're on track, it still may not track with others, right? And I
yeah,
think wrestling just provides that. If you can be consistent and there's longevity there, eventually you're going to break through or you'll find a pivot that at least you'll feel good about, you know?
yeah. Man, it's great because we can talk like we can talk about wrestling, me and you for
Oh
you
yeah.
and I for a while, and just go on different tangents. And this episode probably like well, none of the episodes of the Evolution podcast have much structure. We just kind of have conversations. So that's kind of what we do here. But at the same time, we don't have. We're just kind of talking, right? But I really do feel that, like, there is something to wrestling in a sense, pro wrestling. Talking about pro wrestling, the passion of pro wrestling kind of belongs on school in the right way because especially the way I mean, I know you've probably seen the ad on Facebook where they're like, "Hey, do you know how to change a tire? We want you on school." Well, I don't know if that example is a good one, like, I don't think. But what you can do is you start a community about changing a tire. And then what happens is you see, well, what else do they need help with? Well, they didn't know how to change tires, so they also don't know how to change their oil. They don't know how to change their filters. They don't know how to change their plugs. So we could have a premium group that we talk about and help that next level stuff. But the community at its core, the free community is about changing a tire. But then you have other offerings that come from that as they get more comfortable. So I do see wrestling having a spot because it has such a huge following and a passionate following. So I do see school being something curious. Do you have you thought about that where a community
Oh,
could parlay into wrestling?
definitely. And I found one wrestling school and it's run by a guy who's a trainer. You know, it's good. It's just it's tough with audience, right? At least that's my view of it, right?
Yeah,
And what I would love to see school become, or from a wrestling perspective, imagine, you know, April is WrestleMania season. Imagine if you could get to a point where you've got Triple H and Stephanie McMahon talking about WrestleMania, you know what I mean? You know, 2 weeks out before. Imagine if LA Knight could come on and talk about, you know, "Hey, I'm not in WrestleMania and I'm pissed." And, you know, but, you know, here's what I wanna share, right? Um, so I think giving performers, giving people that are trying to build a brand and have an audience, a vehicle,
yeah,
would be good for the platform and would be good for them, right? Because I think one of the challenges with school, you know, there's let's just say I know they're trying to get to 1 billion users, right? But let's just say there's 100,000 school community owners, right? and I own one community, but I'm in like 30, right? But, you know, a lot of community owners own multiple communities. So that 100,000 owners could well over be 300,000 communities, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a lot, right? It takes it takes a lot. And from a I don't know, like from a branding perspective, I think there's a unique opportunity to take somebody with a brand, give them this platform in a way that it promotes the platform and their brand, right? Because everybody wants this newness, this stickiness. And what I have found that resonates with me the most is community, right? Like I love coming onto the platform every day to being like, hey, there's a community here. How do I fit in? Am I a major player? Am I a minor player? Like whatever it is, you know, as long as there's energy there and you feel welcome and you feel like it's not a waste of your time, you'll continue to show up. And like I said, I think there's got to be some way to work like a major performer into this if they see that. I know they've done that on the UFC side, and you know that's something we can talk about next time. But you know, on
Dumbass
the
will have
business stuff,
to
yeah,
be, yeah.
yeah, right. But and you know, and because there's data points there, right? And like I said, there's that clear ownership between UFC and WWE, right? So so many different ways to take this. So the short answer is, yeah, I think there's more here, and I would love to create that wrestling community. But to your point of the tire example, I don't think it's as simple as, hey, I really like wrestling. I'm passionate about this. I'm going to open up my community and that community will grow. I think, you know, it's a marketing effort. You know, I think there needs to be a little more than, hey, I like watching wrestling on TV. Come watch with me. Right. Because I don't have a big enough brand to attract people that
No.
would want to watch a wrestling show with me, for lack of a better term.
You know what though? People love talking about what we just spent almost an hour talking about just randomly. We're talking about this story, we're getting lit up, and we're talking about that. Like people in the wrestling community really, really, really love that. And I think a community built off of just starting to be built off of the passion for the wrestling business as a whole, not just WWE, not just like, but the pro wrestling business that maybe it is centered on like in the podcast area, right? Like the podcast, there's not like a, we're going to teach you to do this and we're going to teach you to do that, but the premium would be centered on like the podcast. I don't know if so basically, essentially, little seed planting idea here.
Mhm.
You have a podcast that like you talk maybe 2, 3 times a week, maybe weekly, however you want your frequency to be, and you do deeper dives on some of the things that we were talking about, and news coming out, and like reactions of this and that. And you could have your community like almost be live and experience and ask questions and like make it a live experience. And yeah, that premium level is just supporting the podcast. It's supporting the host. It's supporting people do this all the time. Like, I don't know, what are those guys called that are on the radio? I used to like free beer and hot wings. They have like the free beer and hot wings show where and then you can like get the premium and you get like the newsletter and you support the show and like it's not really like, hey, I'm fixing this for you, but it's more like, hey, here's our package if you support the show and you jump up into this level and you do $20 a month and then there's this level for $50 and you get boom boom boom. Down the road, after you build that, that could be at this level, you get to meet ABC because we now know those 3 people because of the podcast, we got those people on, and this is a long-term idea. You'd have to start with indie guys, start with guys that have no name, like us. You know, you're on a bu you nobody
Hey,
knows.
Chris,
Yes, nobody knows who you are talking about that. That's funny that you say K Crusaders.
yeah.
We have our inside joke and Evergreen Foundations on school and our ecosystem, Trinity Code, Dinka's community, I think is where it started, where Sarah Geelan, our manager, it talks about cake all the time. So we called ourselves the Cake Crusaders, and that would be our tag team. So maybe that is a podcast idea that you morph off of, like you just film a podcast, you film talking about it. And then after that, you can add stuff to make it, hey, support us and you'll get this and you'll get that. And you'll get our weekly newsletter where we give you our opinions on what just happened and stuff like that. I think there is a monetization pathway for a community like this, but it's not going to be your traditional pathway where you're going to fix something for somebody. It's more where they're going to be in an exclusive club. They get extra perks because, that's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, no, and just imagine if we could take that Cake Crusaders idea and literally build a tag team reverse engineered. So the merchandising, the branding, getting known, right?
Yeah.
Imagine we show up to like an indie show and people like, is that the Cape Crusaders? Like, because people are wearing our t-shirts and we've talked about it, right? Like you can build a whole, no, and I'm not getting in the ring to save my life. You know what I mean? Cause, that would definitely be the end of me. But, it's this whole idea of, how do you create this brand, right? And I think you can do that by understanding the business, and there's a value to having people want to, I think people want to talk to people that they know and trust around the business, right? So if you're a wrestling fan, you will attract other wrestling fans, and and it's interesting, right? Because it's built in with this whole face heel thing. So good guys and bad guys, right? Like as a wrestling fan, you don't want everybody to be like, "Oh yeah, this wrestler's the greatest," and there's no dissenting opinion. You want the back and forth. You want to be like, Penta's the best wrestler in the world. And you want someone to be like, Penta sucks, right? Because that, you know what I mean? Literally look at John Cena. He'll go into a packed auditorium, 50,000
So
people,
fun. This
and he
is
can
so
get
fun.
them to chant John Cena rocks, John Cena, like whatever that,
So it was,
whatever the
I think
variation is, right?
this was actually the first time I was a part of it was Memorial Day.
Okay.
I don't know the year, but it was Memorial Day when AJ Styles was just coming into the company, and he had the boys behind him there, the OC or whatever
Oh,
they
yeah,
call.
yeah, yeah.
He had those no, not Ken Anderson.
Gallows and
Yeah,
Kevin Gallows and Anderson. I'll say it that way
yeah.
because I'm butchering
So,
their first names.
yeah, them behind him, and they were doing the beat up John Cena thing. And the arena goes, "Let's go, Cena! Cena sucks!" And it was the coolest thing. Like the half of the thing, it would just rumble, and a lot of the people are saying both sides
Yeah,
because you know, and it's so cool. Like
yeah.
that kind of stuff is what's awesome about the wrestling business. But yeah, I was there when they did that, and
Nice. Wow.
I honestly, man, when it comes to school and I think it's an untapped
Mhm.
the internet wrestling community loves talking about wrestling. I think school and having an actual fan home and not like a, "Hey, we're gonna teach you how to wrestle, or we're gonna teach you this, we're gonna teach you that," but having a home for fans that has something to offer, like live discussions and live people wrestling fans like to talk. If you had free groups, like have one meetup a week and you were just talking about wrestling, I bet you it would be packed if you had 20, 30 wrestling fans in there. And then you base it around like a podcast and basically live discussions. You can have different groups. You could have different classes about all sorts of stuff. You could have votes on like your favorite wrestlers and stuff. If you had your first 100 members, your engagement would probably be through the roof in something like this because they like to debate. They like to talk. You could have a thread about best match ever, and it could probably go all day long, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
that I do see school being a rich at home for uh culture of wrestling fans. I really do. I think wrestling fans once they're involved, and then you got the leaderboard, and oh, you could make it so fun.
Um,
You really could. The leaderboard, people come in, they're a jobber. You know, yeah, yeah, it's a lot of fun.
yeah.
Like you can do a lot of fun things with a wrestling based community. So I do see it as an untapped gold mine, honestly.
Well, we'll keep having the discussions and we'll figure out how to make that happen. And I think that's the challenge. It's the catalyst, right? Like what gets you started. And like I said, I think the challenge is really around marketing, right? I think you've got to find that audience
Yeah,
and bring them in. And then I think once you've brought in your initial audience, I think the school and the algorithm may help grow it, but I think it would be super difficult just to start at zero
yeah,
and build up, right? Because you want to have those conversations, right? You want that back and forth. You want somebody, and it's not about agreement, but you want somebody to give their perspective because you want to play off of that, right?
yeah. Yeah, I think that's why like my it kind of popped to my mind like podcast discussion. You get two people, you start talking, you get the content. I'd say like you rush, do 5 to 7 episodes that you can get like on a YouTube, and then you get your base members, and then those base members like your YouTube, subscribe to your YouTube, excuse me, stuff like that. That's when the algorithm's gonna go, oh, wrestling fans like this page. and
Mhm.
they're gonna start showing it to more and more wrestling fans, and I think the using Andrew Kirby talks about, this, like, your school community can basically write the algorithm for your new YouTube page if you have enough of your base members going to your YouTube and subscribing, because then YouTube's gonna go, "Well, we want more people like that." Where a lot of people do this wrong is they are like, "Hey, I started a YouTube. Aunt Sally, Uncle Jimmy, Mom, Dad, go subscribe to my YouTube." And then the algorithm goes, "Well, Aunt Sally likes crocheting, so that must be that well, who we gotta show it to." And people mess up their business marketing pages because they have a bunch of people that aren't their ideal clients.
Yeah.
So using your audience members in your community for your community-based YouTube is a really good synergy.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there. So, like I said, you and I are very connected. So I know we'll continue to have those discussions. And,
Yeah.
I think this because again, totally unscripted, right? We didn't even have like an outline. We didn't even say like, "Hey,
No.
we're going to talk about this," but literally we could keep talking for another 10 hours. Like if there was
Oh,
like
yeah.
a school marathon and like we were just like, we're opening up a room for 48 hours, you could do that if you're talking about wrestling. And
Oh,
it
yeah.
wouldn't be like us just repeating the same stuff over and over and over again. You could literally go 48 hours without even thinking about it if you're just going back and forth about wrestling, the business, what's happening now, because there's so much product, there's so much opportunity. But I think to your point, there's an opportunity there to harness that. I think it's just what I've learned is that it it can't be contained all within school, in my opinion. I think
Yeah.
you've got to, you need to get this product out to other people because, people will see this if they were here in your community. They'll see it if they're on Spotify, but it's challenging, right?
Yeah.
And you 2x that by putting it on YouTube. You 3x that by putting it on X and something else and Instagram and that. So it's a lot of work, but I think once you find people and they found you, then that's where the community part comes. And I think this is the best platform to house that community. I think that's
Me too.
I say that, yeah.
I see it working really well for that whole, like, the synergy between the 2 industries is pretty cool, and I see it working really well. Like you said, we could talk about this forever. I feel like we got to touch on a few things. This was more like a light bulb,
Mhm.
seed planting episode of this podcast. We might look back at this and be like, "Hey, that's where we kind of started something that wherever we are today talking about wrestling started with that episode on the
Mhm.
podcast." Um, I believe that school is looking for those specific niches, and wrestling should be on that. So I don't know, are podcasts on the line? Are things up? I love to talk about it. I could talk about it for hours. We could pick one topic and talk about that for a loop. And I guess I do believe that some niches. Um, I work with Cheyenne Janney, who owns an awesome volleyball recruitment niche, right?
Oh,
And they say
okay.
recruitment community, and they say 90% of your people are gonna come from school, right? Not for her, because she works with teenage girls that are looking for college opportunities and their parents. So for her, she needs that YouTube presence. She needs when people Google, help with the recruiting process, she needs to pop up and then her school community because people are gonna be like, "Wow, that's cool. What is this community about this?"
Yeah.
So just like wrestling, I think right now is the time to do something because it's not been done.
Mhm. Yeah, no. And I think, school's great, but there's still a barrier to entry because you
Oh,
need to set up a profile, right? So that's, it's crazy that even though it's not a super high friction point, and if you're on school, you're like, just do it, right? But until you start using the platform, it becomes a lot harder. So when you can just be on YouTube and then it's just instant, it allows you to, again, build that audience. And once
yeah.
you build enough trust, then people want to invest the time to say, well, I'll set up a profile, right? So that's what I found is it needs to be all those elements. But I've lived that by being on the platform, right? Where I was just like, hey, this is a great idea. Everyone will want to join this. And I'm like, no, you know what I mean? Like after a while, you realize, hey, people have a billion different things going on. They're in all these different directions. It's no offense to you or your community. It's just, it's a bandwidth challenge, it's a marketing challenge.
Yeah.
Again, it goes to that quote, best known beats the best. So I think it's really about how do you take all your tools, become best known, and then offer value when you can get people to the destination. So if
Well,
school's the destination, how do you create enough value then when they're here, they're like, well, I found you on YouTube, I found you on Instagram, I found you on this, I found you on that. And then when they're here, they want to stay because now they're like, well, I found you on YouTube, but the community is here. I saw your tweet, but here's where I can be and support the Cake Crusaders. And,
Yeah,
I talk
yeah.
to Sarah and I can do this and I can do that. So I think that's what I'm finding very interesting. So yeah, excited to see where this might morph into.
Yeah, me too. I am. The more I get deep into like, they always say the riches and the niches, right? And
Yeah.
the more I get deep into this, like loving to build schools, working with cool people, and like it's really fun to look at something that's like a fun niche and be like, how could you make this a culture and something
Mm.
cool and something people want to show up to groups and something people want to talk about weekly and stuff like that. It's really cool to look at something, especially like wrestling or like the volleyball school is talking about. Look at something that's obscure and not your like everyday things that you see a lot of, and really go, how does this translate to school? So it's kind of cool that we got to do that in
Oh,
this
that's
last
awesome.
hour. I don't know. For me, I have that seed planted where I feel like a podcast or just a conversations between you and I, if the very least would just be a blast every week. It'd just be a lot of fun. We could react to what's going on. We could talk history. We could talk certain aspects. There's so many things in this business that you can just really break down and talk about that people are curious to listen to.
Yeah. No, it literally takes no prep, right? And
Yeah.
and anyone can join in and people will, like I said, people can pick up the story quickly because it's just out there on so many different channels. And I think that's what makes wrestling part of, culture, right? Is that it resonates, and it may not resonate positively, it may resonate negatively, but people have an emotion. And I think that's the thing. If you can get people to care one way or another, whether they care not to like it or they care to enjoy it, they'll be interested, right? And they might want to hear, a little more because they have an interest that you're sparking. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, me too. Well, I thank you, Chris, for stopping by the Evolution Podcast. It's a kind of cool conversation with me. I've been looking forward to it. Not too many people, not everybody is cup of tea is wrestling, but for me, I light up talking about it. And I know you do too, and our dear friend Sarah. So yeah, wrestling's always a fun topic for me to just nerd out on and talk about a lot. So I thank you for stopping by the podcast to talk about it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And yeah, follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. We're on Pinterest, the Evolution Podcast of Evergreen Foundations here on School. And look forward to maybe more conversations on wrestling from me and Chris. Until then, keep evolving, everybody. Have a great day.